All right, hello everybody. This is the Kubernetes SIG architecture meeting for April 23rd, 2020. Please abide by our code of conduct, and with that, we will get started. Let's see if I can share. So we have a relatively short agenda today, which is nice. Starting out, just wanted to announce this has already been more emails on this than one would love. But just to make sure everybody knows about it, the SIG PM shut down and the enhancement subproject is moved back to SIG architecture where it actually started some years ago. So that's a new subproject here. So I guess we'll have to get that into our readout rotation for next time. That's really all there. From that, unless anybody has any comments or questions on that, we can move on to Jordan's.
Yeah, John. Has there been? Okay, there's a lot of feedback.
Let me mute.
Okay. Yeah. So, John, have they set up meeting cadence yet for this new subproject? How is that going to work? Is it only on email, or is there going to be a weekly or bi-weekly call?
Really, we haven't decided yet. I think we're probably going to want a bi-weekly, but with everything else going on with the release, 119 discussion and everything, we've kind of put off that whole topic until next week. But I think we'll probably want that because we want to do some changes around, in particular around KEP validation, and it sort of dovetails with some of the validations we want to do on KEPs for the PRR stuff. So, as well as other things we're talking about, making KEPs more discoverable and more usable and more manageable. So we will, I think, need probably a bi-weekly cadence on that, at least for a while. Not that I want another meeting. Okay, Jordan, you're up, man.
Cool. Let me share my screen. Looks like I can't right now.
I have to do something. Just a second. Okay.
And I think you have to stop sharing.
Go for it.
All right. So what I wanted to show was a demo of a mechanism for sending warnings from the server to API clients. In this case, it's specifically kubectl, but it could be any API client. This is using a mechanism that is proposed in the KEP that's linked in the agenda. It's using warning headers as defined by the HTTP RFC. And the particular warning that I have the server sending in this demo is about use of deprecated APIs. And so I have here a file that has a bunch of beta version RBAC objects, which were deprecated in 117, which you may or may not have known, depending on how closely you read the 30 pages of 117 release notes. And so today, if you apply those, the server happily accepts them, and you may not even realize you're using a thing that is has an end date associated with it. But with this warning mechanism, when I apply these, the server can send back warnings that say things like, this type is deprecated, what version it's deprecated in, what version it's scheduled to not be served anymore, and if there is a replacement API, which there is in this case, which one to use instead. The way this is working, again, the server is sending back these headers. The client, when it parses responses from the server, can parse those warning headers and accumulate them in the request object, or the response object that it gets back, and then the client can associate a handler that says, what do you want to do with warnings you get back from the server? And so clients could do things like ignore them, silence them. They could log them. They could print them to standard error. In this case, I set one up for queue control that deduplicates all the warnings it gets for a given invocation and outputs them to standard error, similar to other warnings that it can output to standard error already. Because this happens at the client level, this actually works for any kube control command that uses client Go. So if you do gets, or if you do annotate, it even works if you do raw commands. So if you're like giving kube control an endpoint on the server to speak to, and it's not doing any parsing of the body or anything else, it still will handle warning headers that come back from that endpoint. So because it hooks in at such a low level, it's actually very effective at catching all the different types of calls that you make to a server. So this is demonstrating it.
Questions, Jordan?
Yeah. Oh, when do I want questions
now? Or
let me finish the demo and talk through the mechanism, and then I'll take questions. Because it hooks in at a low level, it's very effective at catching all the ways you talk to the server. You can set a process-wide handler, or you can set a per client handler for what you want to do with warnings. So there's some flexibility there. Yeah, that's the demo. I'll take questions now.
First of all, can I say thank you for finally tackling this? I've wanted this since before 1.0.
Yeah.
So thank you. Is this implemented as sort of free-form strings, or is it structured? So like, is this API group is deprecated a formal thing, or is it just a conventional string?
That's just a stringly typed thing. The RFC around warning headers, it's just a text string. So if I can actually dump out the header, that's what it looks like coming across the wire. So there's a code. There are a few RFC defined codes. 299 is the sort of generic warning you can display to a user. You can optionally indicate like who is generating this, and then it's a quoted string.
Within our code base, are we structuring it, or are we just allowing strings to be added onto the request at various stages of the REST pipeline?
So the mechanism would allow arbitrary strings. The places where I'm using it, it's generated in a central place. So at least the initial uses would be consistently formatted. One of the things that we talked about yesterday in the SIG API machinery call was starting with it in a very narrow set of use cases, but eventually there are other places we would like to use this as well. Things like field level warnings, or things that we know are bad today, but we can't like start rejecting for backwards compatibility reasons, but would really like to let people know you're doing a bad thing, you probably aren't doing what you mean. So there are a lot of places we would like to use this, but part of getting to use it in those places would be coming up with guidance and maybe sort of bounding the way that you added warnings, so you had to go through sort of well-established formatted paths instead of just throwing strings into the
yeah, that's really my concern, right? I wanted it from before, around 1.0 anyway, because we have historical baggage that we'd like to tell people, hey, you really should stop using this field, or you've set these two fields in an incompatible way, and I'm breaking the deadlock by choosing X. Mm-hmm. And we have more than a handful such examples. So this is what I've wanted forever, to be able to plumb those things back through.
Yeah, so that was definitely in mind, finding the balance between letting us use it in different layers of the stack and avoiding just sort of a mess getting sent back out to the user. And so thinking through like what is the threshold for a warning, what deserves a warning, what doesn't, what's the guidance around how that's structured, and then at least for the things in tree, having helpers to say, similar to our validation helpers. Like if you're giving a warning about a field, you should give the field path, you should give this, you should give this, sort of putting rails around what comes out.
Exactly what I was thinking, right? We put all this machinery in place to make sure that validation errors are more or less consistent. Not that everybody follows it, but mostly they do. And I wondered if at the same time it would make sense to return the same structure, but warnings instead of errors. I understand that's probably more than you are wanting to tackle at the moment.
Yeah, because the warnings actually can get surfaced by clients other than like our clients. If we're using warning headers, they could get surfaced just as text. I probably wouldn't do like JSON encoded values in these.
Oh, no, I just mean to pass them back as formatted structures, which a higher level concept would format consistently.
That's consistent, yeah.
Base 64 encoded JSON objects. Quick question, Jordan. So is the thought process that sometime down the line we would allow external components that we plug into us, like admission controllers, CRDs, that kind of stuff, will be able to do things as well?
Yeah, so the first step is a very narrow use, specifically around deprecated API usage. This connects to some of the other things that we're trying to do around limiting the lifetime of pre-release API versions. So improving the visibility to when you're using those is a big, important part of that. But if we can get the mechanism in place to allow the server to send warnings back to the client, then yes, eventually the goal would be to start making use of it at the field level and allow extension mechanisms to contribute warnings as well. So having that guidance in place is important to do before we sort of open up the gates to let other things add warnings.
So then
sorry, go ahead, Tim.
A dumber question. The warning header is not in any of the OpenAPI spec or anything like that, right? This would be just people who are going to write clients will have to see this in action and essentially write code to pull stuff from the HTTP header.
So we would build the capability into Client Go. So if you're using Client Go,
right? But the other, I mean, Python and all the other people that use code generation tools. Okay. Sorry, Mang, please go ahead.
So I think my question was similar. In Client Go, would we have to extract it from the header, or is there a function call to extract the warning automatically?
So I can actually link to the proof of concept. But the short version is the places where we parse server responses, we are already extracting the warning headers into the response object. And so that work would be done for you if you are using Client Go.
Okay.
And then you can determine what you want to do with warnings process-wide or per client.
Got it. And then in your previous response, you mentioned something about extensions contributing warnings, something like that. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So when a write request is sent to the API server, it has the option, it can optionally be routed to admission webhooks. And today, those admission webhooks can allow the request, or they can reject the request. And if they reject the request, they can return, a status that gets sent back to the API user. So they can fail a request and control the status that gets sent back, and send a forbidden error or an invalid error or something like that. The goal is to maintain parity with the extension mechanisms that we are telling people to use. So just like we could make use of this warning mechanism in process for things like validation or admission, to continue allowing requests for compatibility reasons, but surface information to users that you're probably making a mistake here. You probably want to change this. We
Right.
wouldn't want
So
to
are
let
you
in.
saying that the webhook can additionally contribute messages to the warning that will be returned somehow?
That would be an eventual goal, yes.
I see.
So a webhook could allow a request, but say allow this, but warn and have some warning that would be pointed to the user.
I forgot to ask this yesterday. Does the current mechanism allow you to add multiple warnings, and is there a limit, or should there be a limit at some point?
It does let you add multiple warnings. I'm sure there are practical limits. I hadn't thought through like trying to protect against ridiculous numbers of warnings coming back from the server. Once
I mean,
we
I think
open
there
it
is no
up
official
to,
header limits, but there is
Yeah,
practical
there-
ones.
I mean, as long as we're generating them in process, we can be well behaved. Once we open it up to extension mechanisms, we would probably need to think through, like, are you limited to a certain number or a certain length? But
Yeah.
Is
that's a
this
good balance. Go ahead.
Is this mechanism only for warnings related to deprecated versions, or is this extensible to any kind of warning?
So the mechanism is generic. It's just sending up, you can't see, I didn't share my screen. It's just a warning header. So the header is not specific to deprecations. The first use of it would be related to deprecations, but there's nothing on the client side that would be specific to deprecations. The client's just presenting warnings sent to it. So that gives us flexibility in the future to use that for field validation specific things or other warnings that extension mechanisms want to contribute.
Got it, thanks. And one last, probably dumb question, like if I'm targeting one Kubernetes cluster and I see a set of warnings and then I upgrade that Kubernetes cluster, I should be able to see the new set of warnings related to the deprecations that have gone into the new version, right? For the same version that I'm querying using kubectl or client-O.
Right. So if I'm speaking to, like,
Is that
to give
correct?
the example, the RBAC objects were deprecated in 1.17, the beta ones were deprecated in 1.17. If I'm making a request to a 1.16 cluster, for example, I wouldn't get warnings because they hadn't been deprecated yet. But if I was then speaking to a 17, 18, 19 cluster, at that point they've been deprecated, and so you would start getting the warnings.
Looks good, Jordan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really great. There was one question I had with respect to, we were talking yesterday in the, because David Eads is working on the metadata in the APIs in order to support the particular use case for this that Jordan's talking about. And he mentioned though that kubectl by default, or the way its discovery works for APIs, it picks the first thing, which isn't necessarily one that's not deprecated, even if even if a non-deprecated API version exists. Do we have any plan to address that so we don't start getting all kinds of extraneous warnings out of kubectl commands?
So the only deprecated API that we prefer over a GA API, bad, John. There you go. The only deprecated API we prefer today in kubectl is ingresses, which was for backwards compatibility reasons. Every other API version, we put the non-deprecated version first in discovery. And that's how custom resource versions are ordered as well. GA ones are ordered before pre-release ones in discovery.
Okay, so it's not really an issue. The primary thing there was one about the warnings coming out, and the other was about, this is off topic maybe, is for the thing David's working on, if we have a metric for this, because this makes it discoverable, deprecations discoverable for clients, but for operators who aren't necessarily the same people as the client, looking at the clients and what other clients are doing, we want some way for them to be able to discover it. And a metric would be the right way, but he was saying that it gets polluted by this problem with key control. So it's not really the topic here, and it can be discovered there. And I see Mo has a hand up. I'd rather
just to tag on to what John said before Mo goes, there is another piece in the proposal, which is an admin-facing side, specifically around deprecated API use, so that there are metrics associated with use of those APIs. So the warning thing is the kind of nice thing to demo, but at the same time, I'm making those deprecated API requests, a counter metric would be ticking up so that an admin managing this cluster could see, oh, something is using this deprecated API, reading to it or writing to it, so that they have server-side admin-facing information to help them decide whether it's safe to upgrade this cluster to the next version that drops those deprecated APIs. All right, Mo.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so I can't remember exactly the warning text you showed for like RBAC v1 beta 1 is disabled. Like it was like in 117 or whatever was deprecated will be removed in such and such. Yeah, does it make sense for at least those types of warnings to include the version of the Cube API that's sending it to you? Mostly in the context of like if you use the same API against two like just off by one clusters and one of them gives you a warning and the other one doesn't, it's a little like if the user doesn't happen to know that one is just slightly older, it's kind of strange, right, for the same action. Like I know conceptually why it's generating warnings, right? Because one server is like in the future and one's in the past.
We'll get right on the future telling module so that we can announce the end deprecation dates before we actually deprecate them. I'm kidding. I don't know. I was trying to avoid super lengthy verbose messages, especially if, as you saw when I applied a manifest that had several deprecated things in it, you get a warning about each distinct deprecated API you're using. And so the current version of the server you're speaking to is like repetitive information. So I was trying to factor that out, but they can get sort of unwieldy and long already. So I was trying to pare it down just to the essentials, but we can talk about it in the implementation.
Yeah, I can like see that people will end up using this for advertisement.
Yeah.
At some point.
I sure hope not. Okay, so Jordan, then your ask right now from this group is to review the KEP there and put all these questions and comments. Is there anything else you need from this group?
No, it was also to sort of close the loop on some of the questions around the beta lifecycle KEP. Like, if we're going to deprecate this, are we doing a good job giving that information to users and giving admins tools to manage that? And so this is sort of closing the loop on that.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was a great demo. Okay, let's move on. I actually prefer somebody added this, but I'm sorry, not sharing. Somebody added this. I'd prefer to do this before sub-project readouts, just so we get to those sub-project readouts can always be done next time. I'd rather we get to unique business first. So Tim and Cal, what do you got here?
Hey, everyone. Anybody who's been paying attention to the ongoing Dualstack work probably noticed that there was a fair amount of thrashing as we figured out some of the defaulting and semantics around choosing IP families and what happens with updates across upgrades and those sorts of things. It turns out it's actually fairly complicated. And Cal and I have been going back and forth for quite a long time now on what could work, what does work, what we need to do, what is optional, those sorts of things. And I thought it was just worthwhile popping in to say two things. One, it's still going. We have Cal moved it from Clayton's issue into an actual KEP update PR, but we're still going there. So for those of you who are sort of API wonks, Jordan, and want to look at some of the nuances around the complexities around upgrades and what if situations, it's a hell of a read. We're also trying to take a step back. We've created a new doc, which we are trying to get some consensus on, like, actually, what do people expect out of this feature? Because I think maybe we don't have full alignment across the community about what the sort of expectations of a dual stack cluster would be in the face of upgrades in particular, but also just sort of default operation mode. So I thought, since we're doing SIG Arch today, I would put out a call for help for people who like to think through these sorts of API puzzles, and people who are familiar with dual stack, to come and comment on a doc and just simply add your opinions about, what do you think should happen by default? Like, what would the user experience be that you think would make sense? That's all. Unless Cal wants that.
Is there a link to the doc?
I will post it in the chat momentarily.
So one asked him, there was one issue or a PR where for 118 for graduating the dual stack to beta, and that has languished because I don't think there is a firm list of things that need to go in before it can hit beta, right?
Yeah, no, like, it is not ready for beta. I might not even be ready for alpha.
Correct.
So anything that tries to move it forward should be shut down for the moment. I think we're not actually that far once we get some of these issues resolved, but right now they're pretty fundamental. So we need to address these.
Right. Why I'm asking that question is I don't have anything to point people to say, go look there, other than a list of issues and PRs in progress. That's the problem.
Well, there's a KEP update PR now. You can point them to that one. It's specifically focusing on the persistence of IP family selection and that topic, but it's getting to the fundamentals of the feature.
Sounds good. I'll look it up.
I posted the link to the doc.
Thanks. One thing I wanted to bring up too is I've seen some questions about, like, backporting fixes that are specific to dual stack. And I think this is probably the alpha feature I've seen enabled and used the most recently. And it would probably help to be clearer about whether we plan to fix and backport fixes for this feature, just to set expectations for people using it currently.
Yeah, I mean, generally the policy is no backports for alphas, right?
Yes, but people are not clear about that apparently. Like, they enable it, and then something fundamental in their environment doesn't work, and it's clear that they expect or desire fixes and backports of fixes. So if there's a sort of a central place that's tracking progress of the feature and saying, this is alpha, this is when we plan to go beta, or when we're targeting beta, this is the point when we think it's reasonable to start using it, and we would consider backporting fixes if they're found at this point. That it might help to have a place to point.
We have the enhancement, right? This is sort of the tug of war that we have with alpha. We need people to use it, or we won't find some of these issues. But at the same time, backports are non-zero risk, and are we really willing to take that for alphas? Mostly we've fallen on the, no, we're not willing to take that risk for alphas. I don't really see any fundamental reason to change that.
I agree. I think centralizing that statement would be helpful.
Right. I'll tell you a practical problem that I saw, Tim, was like there was at least 4 or 5 people who asked me, why am I not enabling Dualstack in my distro or whatever, right? And I had to like hunt for information to say, look, these are all the things that are there. And even this pure IPv6 is not beta, so you can't even use that. So we are not enabling a bunch of these things because they are not ready. And everybody assumed that it is ready, it is working, and it's usable. And I had to push back saying, no, it is not.
I mean, is the alpha designation not sufficiently scary?
Tim, no one reads docs, release notes, change logs, alpha notifications. No one looks at APIs. No one looks at CRDs that say V1 alpha 1 and thinks anything other than, cool, I'm going to use this in production. So I think we have demonstrated sufficient evidence that people are insufficiently scared about the things that are not ready for production use in our ecosystem.
So how do we overcome that?
I mean, other than the thing like shutting down every 10 minutes, I'm not sure we can do anything. And then people would probably just write a restart loop and start it back up again.
I mean, some of them, oh, I saw a tweet that IPv6 is ready. Can you just enable it? I'm like, no, it's not ready.
As a project stance, I don't see how I haven't seen anything that makes me change how I think about alpha, which is the pretty strong statements we've had for the last 5 years or so, which we've tightened and made stronger, are still backed up by the evidence. But I think the increasing truth is that alpha doesn't mean the same thing to everybody outside of our ecosystem.
I mean, early on, we tried to put alpha beta-ness in people's face in the pre-release annotations, having to spell out the words alpha. Like, do we need to go further with the feature gates? You need to turn on a feature gate to use Dualstack. Should the feature be called scary, scary, scary? Don't use this if you care about your cluster. Enable IPv6.
I don't think that's going to change behavior. I probably Jordan's warnings.
I was just going to say my diabolical next step is to make a cluster that has alpha things enabled, return a warning that says
Always.
This is unsupported, blah, 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 blah. I don't know.
I am 100% in favor.
Yeah, I think the warnings, but we also have talked about this lenses thing, right, Tim? So like where in queue control, you'd have to actually put the word alpha in your command line, when you want to use an alpha thing. Now that doesn't do anything for other clients, but at least people mucking around there would have to explicitly.
But a perfectly fair answer is if people weren't trying the IPv6 stuff and actively using it, like what is happening here is people are running with IPv6 and then going and harassing people like Dims and myself and Jordan, and I'm sure everybody here has been like, hey, when's that IPv6 thing coming? And so it does create the kind of user-driven feedback we want. It's just we got it wrong and we're going to have to fix it potentially doesn't always follow from alpha.
I guess the two things I'm looking for specifically, the first is just a clear place that is calling out, these are the issues that block getting to beta, and these are the issues that we think block getting to GA. We've used project boards for that in the past. Like we've used label queries. Like there are a lot of different ways to do it, but a really concrete place that people in the project can go to say, like, why aren't I enabling this alpha thing? Are there known issues? Like you can sort of find them if you look, but project boards have been helpful for us in the past with the extension stuff and the API machinery stuff to say, like, all the things in this column have to get fixed before we can go to beta. And then people in the project have one place to go look at that. The second one is just visibility to users, and that's longer term and could maybe do stuff with warnings, maybe do stuff with docs, but at least giving people in the project like a really clear central place to say, what's blocking beta? Oh, this is what's blocking it.
I just realized Cal's not here. He thought the meeting was at noon.
Okay, so what's the follow-up there on Jordan's comment? Like, what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do to make this?
I'll relay that to Cal and Lucky. I think it's a fine idea. I mean, we don't really have a precedent, so we can make stuff up. I don't know. I find project boards to be a little bit tedious, but we don't really have anything better short of creating purposeful labels. You know, we used to have a lot of area whatever labels or effort whatever labels. I don't think we really want to do that anymore, though.
Tim,
Yeah,
Lucky
the thing I like
has,
about go ahead.
Lucky has an issue that or a PR open in enhancement repository, and it's targeted towards 118 and it's stale. All we need to do right now is just update it and make sure that it has the list of things for beta. That's it. Hey, look, Lucky's here. We were just talking about you.
Lucky, the conversation was just the last part I just posted in the Slack separately, was people are confused about if this is going beta, partially because the enhancements issue is stale. So we should take an effort to update any documentation around Dualstack to let people know, like, it is not done. There's lots of good reasons why it's not beta. And if you use it, you should expect something to catch fire.
Okay, so is it just a lingering issue around the beta qualification? Because we did actually pull it from, it was planned to go beta in 118, but it was pulled. So I'll go around and clean that up. Sorry for the confusion, and get it back in order.
Qualification, but it's also like links to specific issues. And as we get reports about issues, those part of triaging them needs to be like, is this beta blocking? And if so, like updating it. So we have a clear picture of what needs to be resolved. So.
Okay. I'll try and tie off the loose threads. Sorry for the confusion that I've left dangling things around.
All right. Thanks, Tim, Lucky, everybody. And if that's everything on that, then we'll move on to the sub-project readouts. We have Dim's up with code.org. And I didn't recruit anybody to do API review, so if anybody on here wants to do that and we have time, then volunteer yourself. But I'll turn it over to you, Dims.
John, can you share the screen, or do you want me to? The doc, so I can see what I added there. Okay.
I think you went on mute, at least I can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. The Dockerless KEP has merged. Can you hide me? I don't want to see myself. Thank you. So the Dockerless KEP has merged. This gives us when the PR merges, we'll get the ability to build kubelet without Docker. So many thanks to Matt McNaughton from Signode. So that's a win. At least the KEP is a win. So we have to work on the PR and get reviews on it. That's the next effort there. Removing some, okay. So what we had done previously was we had vendored all the things that we use during verification into the main go sum itself. So we were picking up lots of packages which we were not using anywhere in our binaries, but they were used only for building and verification. So we found out that some of these dependencies created more new dependencies when updating to newer versions. We found it during the KLOG V2 migration PR. So we went back and fixed majority of these vendored things. Examples are around Golint and other tools. So we moved them into a separate directory with its own go mod, go sum. As a result, what happened was some of the licenses in the root licenses file were also went away because we knew the references to the dependencies in the vendor directory. So the licenses in the root directory also went away. So, but now we have a separate licenses file for the tools that we use. So we have two different licenses file. So that's one of the outcomes of this PR.
So can I mention real quickly licenses? We spent a bunch of time to break licenses up into a bunch of individual files so they'd be far easier to code review. And then that got rolled back for reasons. I have on my to-do list rolling back the rollback once I understand what the reasons were. So just FYI, I'd like to get rid of the omnibus Mondo licenses file and move it back to multiple.
Yeah, I remember that one, Tim. Yes, we should do that. And when we do that, we'll make sure that we'll put all the licenses in the same spot, I guess. It doesn't matter there. It's just that what was happening was when we moved the dependencies to a separate Go mod file, we lost the information about when new dependencies were getting added. We didn't generate. If we didn't generate a new licenses file, then we would forget to validate the new license. So we ended up creating a new file there. But yes, when we can merge it later and have one license file per dependencies, that's fine.
A concrete benefit of this isolation, the one that we ran into the most problems with was the tooling around generating Bazel build files. That brought in a lot of other tools from the test infra, repo infra stuff, including linting stuff, which brought in like SQL drivers, and it was kind of crazy. And it turns out we don't actually need any of that at build time. And so isolating that let us decouple that whole crazy dependency tree from the things that the Kubernetes build itself actually depends on, which is great.
Great. Very happy how it turned out. So the next one is the KLOG V2 migration. So this is basically driven from the team that needed structured logging. They logged the structured logging cap. So to support them, we started down this path where we updated all the dependencies that you currently use KLOG V1. We migrated them to KLOG V2. So that part is done. Now we have a PR in the main KK repository moving things to V2. And I keep updating it every other day, and it's fine. It looks fine. The old KLOG reference is gone. The new one is added, and every other day, something other sneaks in. So I'll have to keep updating. I have a script, so it should be fine. But the harder part was earlier we used to have issues with when updating KLOG, especially scalability issues. So we did get a sign off from the scalability team. They ran with this PR and they said they didn't find any regressions in terms of scalability itself. So that is another good news there. So at this point, what we need to do is there is a list of SIGs with each SIG has 1 or 2 packages that they need to review. I need to find people who can review and approve for specific SIGs. And then I have to ping Jordan or Clayton or one of the root approvers, Tim, to push the whole thing through. Probably like we have to find like a good time to do this work. that's a problem. So we have to find a good boundary, like a Friday afternoon or something like that, where we could get a clean run and push it in. So it won't affect anybody too much. So let me put it in another way. So we are also looking at what is the compatibility story there. Can KLOG V1 and V2 be used in somebody else's project at the same time? If they pull a Kubernetes in, they'll be using V2, but they might have V1 coming from somewhere else. So what is the compatibility story there? I'm working on that problem right now. Jordan left a few comments on that PR in the Kubernetes/KLOG repository. So that's where I need some more progress there to make sure that we have a story for people who will have a mix of V1 and V2 for some time. So that's the update on the KLOG. So then the third one or the fourth one was we pinged a bunch of people for creating tags for their own repositories, like HCS Shim. They are working on a tag. Then the CoreOS Go Systemd and CoreOS package. Those folks responded and they said they're going to cut a tag. We are currently using SHAs. Everybody like Containerd, Runc, all of them use these two packages, and we are all using SHAs. And the CoreOS repository themselves, nobody is working on those repositories much. So at some point, we might have to think about helping them or taking over or something like that. But for now, I just requested a tag and somebody responded from the CoreOS side. So that's good news on those two packages. And the last one I had was customize. We talked to the SIG CLI. There is a link there on that line. So what is happening is we are stuck in customize V2 in our dependency tree, and we are not able to update to newer versions of customize. This is because there is a recursive dependency between us and them, and Go modules doesn't help. And Jordan, did you want to say something more about that?
And I think that's a pretty good summary. The recursive dependency is not new. It was a concern when it was added initially, and the tooling we used at that point sort of, it actually didn't have visibility to the recursive dependency. So it existed, and we knew it existed, and it was raised as a concern, but it was mechanically possible to do. Go modules make our existing problems more visible. That's how I like to frame it. And so now that Kustomize has actually declared its dependencies, and we have tooling to avoid taking on recursive dependencies that we know cause us problems, that visible problem is blocking updates. So I don't have a lot else to say. I haven't kept up a lot with what the plan is. I think Jeff left a comment recently that Kustomize is working to actually drop its Kubernetes dependencies in the code path that the pieces we import depend on. So that sounds promising, but I haven't really paid a lot of attention to how that's being done.
Okay, thank you. That's it, unless anybody has questions on any of these things. Going once, going twice. John, back to you.
Okay, thank you. So we have a few minutes left. I don't know who is adding the stuff about API review, but whoever it is, go ahead and take that readout, and then it looks like somebody else something about one more agenda item.
That was me. The CSR and Ingress V1 APIs are the primary focus for API review for this release. That was mentioned in a previous meeting, but the actual proposal and PR are open now. So progress is being made early in the cycle, which is what we like to see. The on the configuration side, Kube Scheduler is making progress with their config file format and taking plugin arguments and other things that were previously unversioned and actually bringing them into a versioned format. So that's encouraging. I'll link to the PRs around that after the meeting. Those three aspects are the primary things that I'm seeing in the API review requests. And then the last item I also added, this is just a follow-up from our discussion on the utils module a few weeks ago. We had an action item to add tests to check Go API compatibility. That's something that we're actually trying to do better at on the repositories we are wanting people to treat as libraries. And so I linked to the PR where we added that pre-submit. This is using an API diff tool that comes from the Go project. So this is sort of an experiment. I'd like to see us use this in more places for similar types of library repositories. So this is sort of an experiment to get experience with it and keep us from making accidental mistakes.
Oh, one more thought about the K3 utils was we now build, or at least, build, but not test the Windows as well using GitHub Actions. So we did break once when we had updated something which worked on Linux, but not on Windows. So we went back and added an additional test to build it on Windows latest in using GitHub Actions.
Okay, well, that sounds good. Any questions from anybody? We've exhausted our agenda. All right, well then, thank you all very much, and let's all get a couple minutes back. Have a great day.
Stay safe.
Stay
Bye.
safe. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks all.